There's been a lot of discussion amongst premiers in Canada that more money is needed to fix the healthcare issues many provinces are facing. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, the premiers are meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Will a deal get done?
Well, a deal will be offered. Will it be signed off on by the time they all leave Ottawa tonight? And look, as far as I know, most, if not all of them, are leaving the nation's capital tonight. It's not going to be a multi-day, drawn-out affair. So there's going to be an offer. Much of the speculation is a little over 100 million over 10 years. We'll see if that gets sweetened a bit. It's definitely not what the premiers wanted. They wanted, and they've been calling for years, an immediate increase to 35% of healthcare spending in this country being covered by the federal government instead of the current 22%. That's not going to happen. That would be the equivalent of about $28 billion a year and growing. So they will get something. And they're also going to get, assistance in terms of looking for ways to innovate. And innovation often means delivering healthcare differently, because whether we're talking about in Alberta or British Columbia, in Ontario or Quebec, we're waiting too long for services quite often. Now, in your province, in Alberta, they've started to experiment with community clinics for surgery, often private clinics, to deliver, but paid for by the government. That's almost 20% of your surgical output now, I'm told, in Alberta. Other provinces are going that way. The federal government is going to be fine with that. Justin Trudeau's not going to interfere and say, tut, 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 you can't do that. In exchange for the money, though, there's going to be a requirement for reporting. Okay, so we decided we're going to really focus on wait times for these surgeries. Have you accomplished your wait times? If they were at 20 weeks, have you brought them down to 10? Things like that. That's the type of data sharing that they're looking for, is, numbers writ large. Have you brought down your waiting list? It's funny how it sounds an awful lot like what I was covering in 2004 when Paul Martin did his deal.
Brian, each province obviously has different needs. You can't, brush everyone with the same stroke here. How does that really play into how each premier is approaching their meeting with the Prime Minister?
Well, each premier has a different relationship with Ottawa, different political stripes. They have been very unified, and that's been impressive over the last while when you've got, liberals like Dr. Anthony Furey out in Newfoundland and Labrador, British Columbia's NDP government, formerly under John Horgan, now under David Eby, and then you've got a bunch of conservative-minded premiers, be it Danielle Smith or Scott Moe or Doug Ford here in Ontario. But Danielle Smith can pick on Ottawa and it helps. Francois Legault in Quebec can pick on Ottawa and it helps. It drives up their support back home. In Ontario, you can't do that. Newfoundland, he's a liberal. He's got to be careful about doing that. Also, they have different needs, as you say. So Newfoundland is the oldest province by age, average age. They've got far more people over the age of 65 in that province than you do in Alberta. Alberta has the youngest population. So that means that you're going to have very different issues when it comes to healthcare. If you've got 20% or almost 20% of your population under the age of 18, which is the case in Alberta, but you've got less than 15% of that in Newfoundland, and you've got a huge seniors population, well, then what you're looking for is going to be different. So that's how a lot of it plays out. And it's why there's not a one size fits all. Having bureaucrats in Tunney's pasture in Ottawa dictate health policy in each province wouldn't work, because you'd be looking at it from what you know locally. And guess what? Ottawa is different than other parts of the country when it comes to age, demographics, health outcomes.
Late last week, the Trudeau government had its second big climb down of the week, Brian. First, it was suspending changes to the medical assistance and dying bill until next year. And then they paused amendments, not canceled, but paused amendments to their own gun bill. Were you shocked by some of these moves?
I was as shocked that they pulled the amendments and said they're withdrawing them, as I was that they put them in the first place, because this was a bill that wasn't about banning hunting rifles and shotguns. It was supposed to be a bill that had broad public support for putting a freeze on the sale of handguns. Some minor changes to gun control laws, but generally speaking, Canadians, poll after poll shows, are fine with putting a freeze on handguns. In fact, probably the majority of Canadians including the majority of conservative voters, would vote to ban them if they could. They don't deal with guns, they don't like them. But they know that people hunt. They know that this is a thing we do in this country. And there was a big public backlash, and the Liberals lost the support of the NDP. They lost the support of the Bloc. They never had the support of the Conservatives for this. They lost the support of Indigenous leaders across the country, Carey Price, the NHL great, all of these things. But very importantly, Liberal MPs turning around and saying, "Do you know what you're doing to us?" Marco Mendicino, the public safety minister, doing a cross-country tour at the request of Liberal MPs to show, look, this is the problem. This is why we have to fix it. Strangely, though, they didn't just pull the amendments and say, okay, we made a mistake. They said, yeah, we might bring them back. So they took political heat for bringing them in. They're going to pay a political price with some of their base for withdrawing them. But any benefit they get from withdrawing them, they're hurting themselves by saying, we might bring them back. That's just bad politics all around.
Brian, we've heard the calls for bail reform across the country. The Conservatives had a motion before the House, and it was voted down on Monday night. Didn't the Liberals say they were open to bail reform?
They are. That's the claim anyway. I do have some doubts about that, but there was no way that the motion, which was defeated 205 against to 116 in favor, was going to get the support of the Liberal government. So, and the reason for that is the Conservatives wrote a motion that beat up on the Liberal government and said, it's your fault. It's your policies that are doing this, and you're wrong, and you've got to do it. If they'd worded the motion differently, if they had put forward it in a very neutral way, maybe they would have gotten support. But as I say, I have my doubts that the Liberals really want to do this. A lot of the problems with bail reform stem from Bill C-75. It was passed in 2019, and it made bail the de facto option, the default option for judges. Told judges and justices of the peace, let people out with the least onerous conditions as quickly as possible. And you talk to, again, like healthcare, you talk to governments across the country, and regardless of political stripe, they all say this has to be fixed. Police chiefs say it has to be fixed. I was talking with one senior municipal police officer in Canada the other day, and he said, these guys run with impunity now because they know there's no consequences. Another police official described it as not a revolving door, but an open door with the way the bail system's going now. So it's got to be fixed. The government's under a lot of pressure, but so far I haven't seen any movement, and just, a lot of talk, no action.
Brian, the Trudeau government has been under fire for a cozy relationship with consulting firm McKinsey over the size of the contracts being awarded and the company's record internationally. What's the controversy here?
Controversy is that McKinsey used to get a small amount of consulting contracts. They're a fairly major firm, but they'd get a couple $1 million over several years. They've been used by all kinds of governments across the country. But under the Trudeau Liberals, it was noticed that they were getting a lot more contracts. Turns out it's about $120 million. It's more than 30, 40 times what they got under the Harper Conservatives. So people started asking questions. They pointed to the cozy relationship between Justin Trudeau and the former managing partner of McKinsey, Dominic Barton, the man who went on to become our ambassador to China. This is a guy who has had a heavy role in forming government policy, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on China. But international media have looked into McKinsey and said that there are real problems with how they operate. They've had trouble in South Africa with allegations of malpractice. They've had issues in the United States where they had to pay a huge fine for their role in advising Purdue Pharma on opioids and how opioids became the epidemic problem that they are, not only in the United States, but everywhere. And McKinsey had a hand in that, holding an executive and client retreat just a short drive from where 1 million Uyghur Muslims in China are put into re-education, basically concentration camps. This is a company that plays on the edges with some, ethical things. Conservative MP Garnet Jennis has been focused on that side of it. There's the huge money side. And while Trudeau says, oh, we don't have a cozy relationship, we're not tight with them, Dominic Barton has been an advisor to Trudeau for years. There are photos of them in, one of Trudeau's famous hugs. that my colleague Warren Kinsella wrote about the other day. It's all very telling. It's all a little, does it pass the smell test sort of thing? Government's going to hire consultants, but are we getting the right advice? And is it money just being handed out to friends?
Last week, we heard about a single hotel in Calgary that housed 10 people at a cost of $6.8 million. Now, you said last week it's not the only hotel, but the tip of the iceberg. Brian, can you explain?
Yeah, when I heard about this from Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner and her order paper question, that and this is all official government documents tabled in the House of Commons, and it showed that between April 1st and October 30th of last year, we paid $6.8 million, and then the same document it shows that in those months from April to October, only 10 people stayed at the hotel. I thought that's got to be crazy, so I asked Public Health Agency of Canada, how many other hotels, how many cities? They won't give us all of the information. They won't say which hotels they were. They say that's a security and commercial sensitivity issue, that they can't divulge that the way they did to Ms. Rempel-Garner. But they did admit 14 cities across the country, 38 designated quarantine facilities that were hotels, and a total cost of $389 million,
Wow.
including $77 million between April 1st and December 30th, when all of the hotels closed. So the one in Calgary ended at the end of October. Other hotels stayed open until December 30th. And you've got to be sure that there were many months, just like in Calgary, there were many months where there were no guests or two guests in a single month. And we block book these hotels, Hal. It's craziness. It's just like what we're doing with the 94 million that we've been able to track so far on what the government's paying for hotels for people coming across at Roxham Road. And again, hotels not always used, but the government's paying for it. Or correction, you're paying for it.
Yeah, the taxpayers, absolutely. Brian, we've also chatted a bit about the federal government and its spending habits. There are reports now that the Governor General's salary increased by $40,000 over the past few years. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is questioning whether Canadians are actually getting $40K worth of value from Mary Simon, extra value. Brian, how does the government really justify this huge increase which took place during the pandemic?
Well, I can tell you that Canadians are not getting an extra $40,000 worth of value from Mary Simon, and that's not a reflection on her. It's just is the Governor General's office worth that, to pay that individual to take on the job? No. How are they defending this? Because the Governor General's salary, like many at the top of the federal food chain, are determined by a set process, and that's why you get the annual pay raises of MPs. So April 1st, MPs are going to get another pay raise. This was done many years ago, and I think it was done for the right reason. Is it still being handled in the right way? I'm not sure, because the pay raises are above inflation. It was about 4.5% per year for for the Governor General, because some of those raises happened before Miss Simon. But Jean Chrétien set this up at a time when MP salaries had not gone up for years, when there were concerns that we were paying our MPs so little that they were open to being blackmailed, that they could end up selling secrets to make ends meet. I mean, at one point, we weren't paying people very much to travel across the country, spend a lot of time away from their families on jobs that literally never end. So he decided, take the politics out of it, set it up on this automatic thing. The Governor General's salary is part of that. But I think maybe it's time to check the formula and say, are we doing it right? You don't want to end up like Ontario. They froze the MPP salaries back in 2008. They haven't had a raise since then. And you've got people who should have retired a long time ago. They won't, because they also don't have pensions. So you got to find a balance. I think the balance is off. And what's happened with the Governor General's salary shows that.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here, but I wanted to chat with you about the record number of people who are crossing into Canada illegally at Roxham Road last year. Now, there's news that American politicians are actually dishing out free bus tickets to get more people there.
Yeah, so this is because people are coming across the southern U.S. border into Texas. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is saying, hey, we'll send you to New York. Here's a free bus. the people are arriving in New York. New York Mayor Eric Adams has National Guardsmen at the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, along with charities and businesses handing out tickets to Plattsburgh, New York, which is the last stop before you get in a cab that takes you to Roxham Road. A New York Post followed this story the other day. They followed people on the buses up to the cabs, to the border. And yeah, they were being told, hey, I got this ticket from the city of New York. They're going to give me a new life in Canada. The Trudeau government needs to raise this with the Biden administration and tell them it has to stop. I doubt they will.
Wow. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.